Thomas Miller's shoes crunched over the gravel path as he made his way through Oakwood Cemetery. The sound was familiar to him now, like the steady rhythm of an old friend walking alongside him. Every Sunday for the past 18 months, rain or shine, Thomas had followed this same path to visit his wife. Eleanor Fall had painted the cemetery in warm oranges and deep reds, leaves drifting down to blanket the ground. Thomas pulled his jacket tighter against the chill. The late afternoon sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the headstones. He nodded at an elderly woman placing flowers at a nearby grave. They had never spoken, but they recognized each other from these Sunday visits. There was a silent understanding between people who carried grief like a familiar weight. Thomas reached the eastern section of the cemetery where Eleanor rested. His weekly routine never varied. He would clear away any fallen leaves, replace the previous week's flowers with fresh ones, and spend time talking to her as if she could still hear him. Today he had brought yellow chrysanthemums, her favorite. "Hey there, Ellie," Thomas said softly as he knelt down on the small patch of grass in front of the granite headstone. "I brought your favorites today." He gently removed the wilted roses from last week and replaced them with the bright yellow blooms. With careful attention, he arranged them in the metal vase embedded in the ground. "The house feels emptier on Sundays," he continued, brushing away invisible dust from the headstone. "I think it's because I'm more aware you're not there. During the week I can pretend you're just at the library or visiting your sister." Thomas had been married to Eleanor for 32 years before a sudden aneurysm took her away. The doctors had called it unpredictable, a time bomb that could have gone off at any moment. Thomas called it cruel. They had just started planning their retirement, trips they would take, places they would see, the garden Eleanor wanted to plant. All those future memories stolen in an instant. "I finally fixed that leaky faucet in the bathroom," he said, settling down to sit cross-legged on the ground. "Remember how it used to drive you crazy? That constant dripping? You'd say it was like Chinese water torture." He smiled at the memory. "Turns out it was just a worn-out washer. 5-minute fix. Took me 18 months to get around to it, though." The cemetery was quiet except for the occasional rustle of leaves and distant sounds of cars passing on the road beyond the wrought iron fence. As Thomas sat there, he noticed the first wisps of fog beginning to roll in from the small lake at the cemetery's edge. It wasn't unusual for fog to gather in the evenings, especially in autumn. "Your brother called yesterday," Thomas continued. "He's worried about me. Everyone is. They think I spend too much time alone. Patricia from next door keeps bringing over casseroles. I think she's appointed herself my official caretaker." He chuckled. "I keep telling everyone I'm fine, but nobody believes me." Was he fine? Thomas wasn't sure anymore. He functioned. He went to work at the hardware store, came home, ate dinner, watched TV, and went to bed. The next day he would do it all again. But there was a hollowness to everything, as if he were just going through the motions of living. The fog was growing thicker now, curling around the bases of nearby trees and headstones. The setting sun painted it with golden and pink hues, creating an almost dreamlike quality to the cemetery. Thomas checked his watch. It was getting late. He should head home soon, but he wasn't quite ready to leave. "I had that dream again," he said, lowering his voice even though there was no one nearby to hear. "The one where I wake up and you're sitting at the kitchen table drinking your morning coffee, asking me why I look so surprised." He swallowed hard. "It feels so real, Ellie. I can smell your coffee, that vanilla creamer you always used. I can hear the way you'd blow on it to cool it down." Thomas wiped at his eyes with the back of his hand. "The dreams are both the best and worst part of my day. For a few seconds after I wake up, I forget that you're gone. And then I remember." The sun was nearly gone now, the last rays stretching across the cemetery. The fog had thickened considerably, creating ghostly shapes as it drifted between the graves. Thomas knew it was time to leave. Visiting hours would be ending soon, and the cemetery gates would close. With a sigh, he got to his feet, his knees protesting after sitting on the cold ground. "Same time next week," he promised, touching the top of the headstone gently. "I love you, Ellie. Always will." Thomas turned to walk back the way he had come, following the main path that would lead to the entrance. The fog was disorienting, making familiar landmarks look strange and otherworldly. As he walked, he noticed fewer and fewer visitors. Most people had already left for the day, not wanting to navigate the cemetery in the gathering gloom. The path curved around a large oak tree, its ancient branches spreading like protective arms over several graves. Thomas paused for a moment, getting his bearings. The fog was now so thick that he could barely see 20 feet ahead. He was considering whether to use the flashlight on his phone when movement caught his eye. Between the fog-shrouded monuments about 50 yards away, a figure was walking slowly. Thomas wouldn't have paid it much attention, probably just another visitor heading for the exit, except for something about the way the person moved. There was a distinctive grace to the gait, a slight tilt of the head that made his heart suddenly pound in his chest. The figure was female, with long hair that seemed to float slightly in the breeze. She wore something pale, a light-colored coat or dress that stood out against the darkening cemetery. Thomas couldn't make out details through the fog, but something about her was achingly familiar. Ellie? The name escaped his lips before he could stop it, a whisper that seemed to hang in the mist. The figure didn't turn or acknowledge him. She continued walking with purpose, heading toward the older section of the cemetery where the Victorian monuments and family mausoleums stood. Thomas stood frozen, unable to move or call out again. His mind raced with explanations. It was a trick of the light. The fog was playing games with his vision. His grief-stricken mind was seeing what it desperately wanted to see. But his heart recognized what his mind couldn't accept. The way she moved her hands as she walked. Eleanor had always talked with her hands, even when no one was there to see. The slight bounce in her step that he'd teased her about for years. The graceful tilt of her head as if she were listening to music only she could hear. The figure disappeared behind a large monument, and the spell was broken. Thomas rushed forward, stumbling over uneven ground, his heart threatening to burst from his chest. When he reached the spot where he'd last seen her, there was nothing but swirling fog and deepening shadows. "Hello?" he called out, his voice sounding strange and muffled in the mist. "Is anyone there?" No answer came. Thomas turned in a slow circle, scanning the area, but he was alone among the silent stones. The figure, Eleanor, his mind insisted, was gone. A chill that had nothing to do with the evening air ran through him. Thomas hurried back to the main path, suddenly eager to be away from the cemetery, away from the impossible thing he'd just witnessed. His hands trembled as he fumbled for his car keys. As he drove home, Thomas's rational mind began asserting itself. He was tired. The light had been poor. The fog created illusions. He was a man deep in grief, and the mind could play cruel tricks under such circumstances. But no matter how he tried to explain it away, Thomas couldn't shake the certainty of what he had seen. Not a ghost or a spirit, he had never believed in such things, but Eleanor, as real and solid as the steering wheel beneath his hands. That night, Thomas lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying those few seconds over and over in his mind. Had he finally cracked under the weight of his grief? Or had he truly seen something impossible? One thing was certain. Next Sunday couldn't come quickly enough. And this time, if Eleanor appeared again, he would be ready. The next morning, Thomas sat at his kitchen table staring into a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. He had barely slept, his mind replaying what he'd seen in the cemetery over and over again. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that familiar figure moving through the fog. "I'm losing my mind," he muttered, rubbing his tired eyes. That's the only explanation. But deep down, Thomas wasn't convinced. What he had seen felt too real, too specific. It wasn't some shapeless ghost or shadow, it was Eleanor, with all her little mannerisms and movements that only someone who had spent 3 decades with her would recognize. Thomas picked up his phone and hesitated. Who could he possibly talk to about this? His friends would worry about his mental health. Eleanor's brother would probably suggest therapy again. No one would believe him, and honestly, Thomas wasn't sure he believed himself. Instead, he opened his web browser and typed, "Seeing Dead Spouse Cemetery." The results were a mix of grief support groups, paranormal websites, and psychological articles about hallucinations caused by extreme grief. Thomas clicked through several links, reading accounts from other widows and widowers who claimed similar experiences. Some found comfort in these visitations, while experts explained them away as the brain's way of processing loss. None of it felt right to Thomas. What he experienced wasn't some vague feeling of Eleanor's presence or a dreamlike vision. He had seen her as clearly as he could see the coffee mug in front of him now. Thomas glanced at the calendar on his refrigerator. 6 more days until Sunday. 6 days until he could return to the cemetery. The waiting felt unbearable. I can't wait that long, he decided, speaking aloud to the empty kitchen. How many times had he done that since Eleanor died? As if some part of him expected her to answer from the next room. Thomas called the hardware store where he worked and told them he wouldn't be coming in today. He claimed he had a migraine, which wasn't entirely a lie. His head was pounding from lack of sleep in the endless circles of his thoughts. After a quick shower and change of clothes, Thomas drove back to Oakwood Cemetery. In daylight, without the fog and shadows, the place looked completely different. Just a peaceful, well-maintained graveyard with neat paths and carefully tended gardens. Nothing mysterious or supernatural about it. Thomas made his way to Eleanor's grave first, feeling slightly guilty for visiting off schedule, as if he were breaking some promise to her. The chrysanthemums he'd brought yesterday were still fresh, bright yellow against the green grass. I need to know if I'm going crazy, Ellie, he said quietly, kneeling beside the headstone.
Was that really you I saw?
After spending a few minutes there, Thomas walked toward the area where he'd seen the figure disappear. In daylight, he could see it was an older section of the cemetery, with weathered Victorian monuments and family mausoleums. Many of the stones were so old that the inscriptions had worn away, the names of the dead lost to time. A man in the green uniform of the cemetery staff was raking leaves nearby. Thomas approached him, trying to appear casual. "Good morning," Thomas said. "Beautiful old section of the cemetery." The groundskeeper nodded. "Been here since the 1850s, this part. Some of the oldest graves in the county." Thomas hesitated, then decided to take a chance. "I was here yesterday evening and the fog got pretty thick. I thought I saw someone walking through here, but they disappeared. Are there other exits from the cemetery in this section?" The groundskeeper leaned on his rake. "Just the main gates. After hours, that's the only way in or out." He studied Thomas's face for a moment. "Was this person causing trouble?" "No, nothing like that," Thomas said quickly. "I just thought I recognized them but lost sight of them in the fog." The groundskeeper nodded slowly. "Fog plays tricks on the eyes around here. Creates all sorts of shapes." He paused. "Though I will say, you're not the first person to mention seeing someone in this area, especially around dusk." Thomas's heart skipped a beat. "Oh, what do you mean?" "Had a few visitors mention seeing a woman walking through here. Always the same description. Tall, long hair, light-colored clothes. Always heading this way." He gestured toward the oldest section of monuments. "Been happening for a few months now. Started thinking we had a trespasser who likes hanging around after hours, but security never found anyone." Thomas tried to keep his voice steady. "Do you believe in ghosts, Mr. Fletcher?" "Pete Fletcher. Been working here 22 years. The man shrugged. "Don't know about ghosts, but I know there are things in this world we can't explain. My grandmother used to say that graveyards are thin places, where the barrier between our world and whatever comes next isn't quite as solid." Thomas thanked the man and continued exploring the area. He found himself drawn to an old stone mausoleum with a weathered family name carved above the entrance. Blackwood. The small building was elegant, but simple, with intricate carvings of ivy leaves around the door. The heavy iron door was secured with a rusted padlock. Looking around the mausoleum, Thomas noticed something on the ground near the corner of the building, a small white button. He picked it up, turning it over in his hand. It looked like it might have come from a woman's blouse or coat. The button wasn't old or weathered. It seemed new, recently lost. Thomas pocketed it without really knowing why. For the next few hours, Thomas wandered through the cemetery, half hoping to see Eleanor again, even though he knew it was unlikely in broad daylight. He took photos of the area on his phone, particularly the path leading to the Blackwood Mausoleum. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, but it felt important to document everything. As the afternoon wore on, Thomas found himself sitting on a bench near Eleanor's grave, scrolling through old photos of her on his phone. He paused on one taken about 2 years ago at their niece's wedding. Eleanor was wearing a pale blue dress with small pearl buttons down the front. Thomas zoomed in on the image, then pulled the button from his pocket to compare. They looked identical. A chill ran down his spine. It could be a coincidence, pearl buttons were common enough. But combined with everything else, Thomas was so deep in thought that he didn't notice the woman approaching until she spoke. "You're here on a Tuesday," she said. "You're usually a Sunday visitor." Thomas looked up to see the elderly woman he often nodded to during his weekly visits. She was small and neat with silver hair tucked under a floral scarf. "I needed to check something," Thomas replied. "I'm Thomas, by the way. Thomas Miller. June Caldwell," she said, sitting beside him on the bench. "My husband Harold is over there." She pointed to a grave not far from Eleanor's. 47 years we had together. "Not enough?" 32 for us, Thomas said. "Also not enough." They sat in companionable silence for a moment. Thomas wondered if he should mention what he'd seen. June had been coming here for years, probably at similar times to him. Maybe she had seen something too. "Mrs. Caldwell, June, have you ever—" Thomas paused, reconsidering his words. "Have you ever experienced anything unusual here?" "At dusk, maybe?" June gave him a sharp look. "You saw her, didn't you? The woman in the fog?" Thomas felt his mouth go dry. "You've seen her too?" June nodded slowly. 3 times now. "Always when the fog rolls in? Always heading toward the old section?" She pulled her cardigan tighter around herself. "The first time I thought it was just someone visiting a grave. The second time I noticed she seemed to flicker, like a television with poor reception. The third time was last month. I followed her." "What happened?" Thomas asked, leaning forward. "She disappeared near that old Blackwood mausoleum. One moment she was there, the next, gone." June's eyes were serious. "I thought I was losing my mind. My daughter said it was my grief playing tricks on me." "That's exactly what happened to me," Thomas said. "Yesterday evening. But the woman I saw, I think it was my wife, Eleanor." Instead of the skepticism Thomas expected, June simply nodded. "The woman I saw reminded me of my sister, Catherine. She passed 5 years ago. Do you think—" Thomas hesitated. "Do you think they're really ghosts? Our loved ones?" June considered this. "I don't know. But I do know what I saw wasn't just fog or shadows or my old eyes playing tricks. There was something there." She paused. "Are you coming back on Sunday?" Thomas nodded. "I have to know." "I'll be here too," June said, standing up. "Perhaps we can watch together. 2 pairs of eyes are better than 1. For the next few days, Thomas threw himself into research. He looked up the history of Oakwood Cemetery online, finding old newspaper articles and historical society records. The Blackwood family had been prominent in the area in the 1800s. The last member, Eleanor Blackwood, had died in 1887. According to local legend, she had been a healer and clairvoyant who had predicted her own death. Thomas couldn't find any connection between the Blackwoods and his wife, but a nagging thought kept returning. Eleanor had been researching her family tree before she died. She had mentioned finding some interesting connections to local history. Could there be a link he didn't know about? On Saturday, Thomas went into Eleanor's study, a small room he had barely entered since her death. Her laptop was still on the desk, gathering dust. With a deep breath, Thomas opened it and turned it on. Eleanor's smiling face appeared on the lock screen, a photo from their trip to Maine 5 years ago. Thomas typed in her password, their anniversary date, and was relieved when it worked. He found her genealogy files in a folder labeled Family Tree. There were dozens of documents, photos of old records and spreadsheets tracking different branches of her family. Thomas searched for Blackwood and found a single document titled Blackwood Connection. As he opened it, Thomas felt his hands trembling. If there was a connection, if Eleanor had discovered something important about her ancestry before she died, it might explain what was happening now. It might lead him one step closer to understanding what he had seen in the fog-shrouded cemetery, and what might be waiting for him tomorrow. Thomas stared at the computer screen, his heart pounding as he opened the document titled Blackwood Connection. The file contained Eleanor's research notes, written in her characteristically organized style with bullet points and highlighted sections. "Possible ancestor connection through my mother's side," Eleanor had written. "Mary Catherine Winters, my great-great-grandmother, may have been born Mary Catherine Blackwood." Thomas scrolled through the document, finding scans of old birth certificates, marriage licenses, and census records. Eleanor had been tracing a complicated family line, trying to connect the dots between her ancestors and the Blackwood family of Oakwood. Near the end of the document, Eleanor had written a note that made Thomas's blood run cold. Family legend says Blackwood women often know when death is coming. Grandmother used to talk about the warning, a dream or vision that came to Blackwood women when their time was near. "Need to ask Aunt Betty if she knows more about this." Thomas leaned back in the chair, trying to process what he was reading. Had Eleanor known she was going to die? Had she received some sort of warning? He thought back to the weeks before her death. Had there been signs he missed? She had seemed more thoughtful than usual, more intent on putting their photo albums in order and updating her will, but Thomas had attributed that to her turning 60. He continued searching through Eleanor's files and found another document labeled, "For Thomas After." His hands trembled as he opened it. It was a letter, dated just 2 weeks before her death. "My dearest Thomas, if you're reading this, then what I've been dreading has come to pass. I've struggled with whether to tell you what I've discovered about my family and the strange experiences I've been having. I decided it would only worry you needlessly, unless it turned out to be true. The women in my family line, going back to Eleanor Blackwood in the 1800s, have had the ability to sense when their time on Earth is ending. It comes as a recurring dream of walking through Oakwood Cemetery toward the old Blackwood Mausoleum. In the dream, someone waits for us there, someone who has gone before. I've had this dream every night for the past month. I've also found records that many of my female ancestors died suddenly, often from conditions that showed no previous symptoms, like aneurysms or heart failures. I've had tests run, Thomas. The doctors found nothing wrong, but I know what's coming. I didn't tell you because I couldn't bear to see you worry, and I wanted our last weeks together to be happy ones, not overshadowed by fear. Know that I have lived a wonderful life with you. You have been everything I could have hoped for in a husband and friend. My only regret is that we won't grow old together as we planned. There's one more thing. A family story passed down through generations. They say that Blackwood women can sometimes find a way back, a way to reach across the veil to deliver messages or warnings to those they left behind. If there's any way for me to reach you, my love, I will find it. Look for me when the boundary between worlds is thinnest on the anniversary of my passing. All my love. Always, Eleanor." Thomas read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down his face. Eleanor had known she was dying and had faced it alone to spare him the pain of anticipation. The knowledge broke his heart all over again, but it also gave him hope. If what Eleanor believed was true, if the Blackwood women really could reach across from whatever came after death, then perhaps he had truly seen her in the cemetery. Perhaps she was trying to reach him, to tell him something important. Thomas checked the date on the letter again and realized something significant. Eleanor had died on October 31st, Halloween, the day when, according to old beliefs, the veil between the worlds of the living and the dead was at its thinnest. Tomorrow would be exactly 18 months since her death. Not the anniversary, but half an anniversary. Could that be important? He printed the letter and several pages of Eleanor's research, then shut down the computer. He needed to be prepared for tomorrow. If Eleanor was trying to reach him, he wanted to understand why. The next morning, Thomas called June Caldwell. He had found her number in the cemetery's Memorial Society directory, which listed volunteers who helped maintain the grounds. "Mrs. Caldwell, it's Thomas Miller from the cemetery," he said when she answered. "I found some information that might explain what we've been seeing." They arranged to meet for coffee at a small diner near the cemetery. Thomas arrived early, claiming a quiet booth in the back where they could talk privately. When June arrived, he showed her Eleanor's letter and research. June read everything carefully, her expression serious. "My sister Catherine died on October 31st too," she said finally, looking up at Thomas. 6 years ago, Halloween, Thomas said. "The day when the boundary between worlds is supposed to be thinnest." June nodded. In the old Celtic traditions, it was called Samhain. It marked the end of harvest and the beginning of winter, a time when the veil between this world and the other world grew thin. She tapped Eleanor's letter. "Your wife believes she was connected to the Blackwoods through her family line?" "Yes," Thomas said. "And she believed the women in her family had some sort of ability, a warning before death, and possibly a way to return, to send messages." "And you think that's what we've been seeing? Eleanor trying to send you a message?" Thomas shrugged helplessly. "I don't know what to believe anymore. All I know is that I saw her, as clearly as I'm seeing you now. And if there's even a chance that she's trying to reach me, I have to try to understand why." June was quiet for a moment, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. "My husband Harold was a history professor at the university. He specialized in local history and folklore. He used to talk about the Blackwood family. They were quite prominent in this area in the 1800s. The last one, Eleanor Blackwood, was something of a local legend. People came to her for healing and advice. Some said she could speak with the dead. Do you think there could be a connection? Thomas asked. Between the original Eleanor Blackwood and my wife? Beyond just a possible family tie? Perhaps, June said. Names have power in many traditions. And if your wife discovered she was a descendant... She trailed off, then fixed Thomas with a serious look. What do you plan to do today? I'm going back to the cemetery at dusk, Thomas said. I need to see if she appears again. June nodded. I'll come with you. 2 witnesses are better than 1. They spent the afternoon reviewing Eleanor's research and making a plan. Thomas found an old map of the cemetery in Eleanor's files that showed the original layout from the 1800s. The Blackwood Mausoleum was marked with a small symbol that looked like a key. What do you think this means? Thomas asked, pointing to the symbol. June adjusted her glasses and peered at the map. I'm not sure, but the Blackwoods were known for their interest in the occult. The mausoleum might have been designed with some symbolic purpose. As the afternoon wore on, they gathered their materials and prepared to head to the cemetery. Thomas packed a small bag with a flashlight, Eleanor's letter, the map, and a digital camera. If something happened tonight, he wanted to document it. The sun was already low in the sky when they arrived at Oakwood Cemetery. Thomas led June to Eleanor's grave first, where he placed a fresh bouquet of chrysanthemums. I'm here, Ellie, he said softly. If you're trying to reach me, I'm listening. June stood respectfully a few steps back, giving Thomas a moment of privacy. When he was ready, they walked together toward the older section of the cemetery, where the Blackwood Mausoleum stood. The groundskeeper, Pete Fletcher, was raking leaves nearby. He nodded to Thomas in recognition. Back again, I see, Pete said. And you've brought a friend. Pete, this is June Caldwell, Thomas said. Her husband is buried in the east section. Pete tipped his hat to June. Mrs. Caldwell, nice to meet you. You folks planning to stay until closing? We lock the gates at 7 today. We might, Thomas said. We're doing some research on the Blackwood family. Do you know anything about their mausoleum? Pete leaned on his rake. Not much. Been locked up as long as I've worked here. No one's been inside for decades, far as I know. He lowered his voice slightly. Though between you and me, I've always thought there was something strange about that place. Never liked working near it after dark. Strange how? June asked. Pete shrugged. Just a feeling. Like you're being watched. And sometimes when the light hits it just right, I could swear I've seen something move inside behind those stained glass windows. But the door's been locked tight for years. They thanked Pete for his insights and continued toward the mausoleum. The stone structure stood on a small hill surrounded by ancient oak trees. The afternoon sun filtered through the branches, casting dappled shadows across the weathered stone. As they approached, Thomas noticed something he hadn't seen before, a small stained glass window on the backside of the mausoleum. The colored glass depicted a woman in flowing robes, her arms outstretched. At her feet was a symbol that matched the key-like marking on the old map. Look at this, Thomas said, pointing to the symbol. It's the same as on the map. June studied the window thoughtfully. The woman must be Eleanor Blackwood. And that symbol, I think it's a key but also a doorway. In many traditions, keys represent the ability to unlock passages between worlds. Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Soon, the fog would begin to roll in from the lake, just as it had the night he first saw Eleanor. Now we wait, Thomas said, settling on a bench with a clear view of both the mausoleum and the path where he had seen the figure walking. As darkness began to fall, a light mist started to form around their feet. Thomas checked his watch. It was nearly the same time he had seen Eleanor 2 days ago. June sat beside him, alert and watchful. Thomas, she said suddenly, gripping his arm. Look there. Through the gathering fog, a figure was moving slowly along the path, tall with long hair and a light-colored coat, moving with that unmistakable grace that Thomas would recognize anywhere. Eleanor, he whispered, his heart pounding. Without thinking, Thomas rose to his feet. Eleanor, he called out, his voice echoing among the headstones. The figure paused, turning slightly, though her face remained hidden by the fog and distance. For a breathless moment, she seemed to be looking directly at him. Then she continued walking, her pace more deliberate now, heading straight for the Blackwood Mausoleum. She heard you, June whispered, clutching Thomas's arm. She actually responded. Thomas was already moving, following the figure with June hurrying behind him. The fog was thickening rapidly, making it difficult to keep sight of Eleanor's form as she glided between monuments and headstones. "We're going to lose her," Thomas said urgently, quickening his pace. The beam of his flashlight cut through the mist, creating eerie shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. They reached the small hill where the mausoleum stood just in time to see the figure approach the iron door. Thomas stopped about 20 yards away, not wanting to frighten her off. June stood beside him, her breath visible in the cool evening air. "What's she doing?" June whispered. The figure, Eleanor, had placed her hand on the door of the mausoleum. Even through the fog, Thomas could see that her form was somehow both solid and transparent at the same time, like a reflection in water. She turned then, and Thomas caught a glimpse of her face. It was definitely Eleanor, looking exactly as she had in life, her eyes finding his across the distance. "She wants us to follow her," Thomas said, his voice hoarse with emotion as if in response. Eleanor gestured toward the door, then seemed to pass through it, disappearing from sight. Thomas rushed forward, reaching the mausoleum seconds later. The heavy iron door remained firmly shut, secured by the ancient rusted padlock. He pulled at it uselessly. "She went inside," he said, running his hands over the cold metal door. "But how?" "The door's locked." June caught up, slightly out of breath. "Maybe there's another way in? A window or a back entrance?" They circled the mausoleum, checking for any other access points. The stained glass window they had noticed earlier was set high in the wall, at least 8 feet from the ground, and appeared to be sealed shut. There were no other doors or openings. "She just walked through the door," Thomas said, returning to the front. "Like it wasn't even there." June nodded slowly. "If what you've learned is true, if she is somehow reaching across from the other side, perhaps physical barriers don't affect her the same way." Thomas stared at the door in frustration. "But how are we supposed to follow her? We can't walk through walls." June studied the door carefully, running her fingers along the frame. "There must be a way. She wouldn't have led us here if we couldn't follow." Thomas thought about the symbol on the map and the matching image in the stained glass window. "A key," he murmured. The symbol looked like a key. Maybe we need to find an actual key to the mausoleum. After all these years? June shook her head. "It's likely lost forever." Thomas's mind raced. Eleanor had been trying to tell him something. She had appeared twice now, leading him to this specific place. In her letter, she had written that she would find a way to reach him if possible. This had to be it. Suddenly, Thomas remembered something Eleanor had said to him shortly before her death. They had been discussing what to do with her grandmother's jewelry. "Keep the locket," she had told him, "the one with our picture inside. It might come in handy someday." At the time, Thomas had thought it was just sentiment, Eleanor wanting him to have something to remember her by. But now, "The locket," he said aloud. "I need to check her locket." "What locket?" June asked. "A family heirloom. Eleanor told me to keep it safe, that it might be important someday." Thomas checked his watch. "But it's at home. The cemetery will close soon. We need to come back tomorrow." Just then they heard footsteps approaching. Pete Fletcher appeared through the fog, carrying a lantern. "Folks, I hate to break up your research, but we're closing in 15 minutes, he called out. "You'll need to head toward the exit." Thomas and June exchanged a look of disappointment. They would have to continue their investigation another day. "We'll be back tomorrow," Thomas promised, taking one last look at the mausoleum before they followed Pete back toward the main path. As they walked away, Thomas felt certain that Eleanor was still there, watching from behind the stained glass, waiting for him to solve the puzzle she had set before him. Back at home that night, Thomas went to the bedroom dresser where he kept a small wooden box of Eleanor's special things. Inside were her favorite earrings, her grandmother's cameo brooch, and the gold locket she had specifically mentioned. Thomas hadn't opened it since her death. It had been too painful to look at their happy faces, a reminder of all he had lost. With trembling fingers, he clicked open the locket. Inside was indeed a small photo of them on their 20th anniversary trip to Venice. But as Thomas tilted the locket in his hand, something unexpected happened. The back panel of the locket shifted slightly. Curious, he examined it more closely and found a nearly invisible seam around the edge. Using his fingernail, he gently pried at it until the panel popped free, revealing a hidden compartment behind the photo. Inside was a tiny, antique-looking key made of tarnished brass. Thomas stared at it in disbelief. All this time, Eleanor had left him the key to the Blackwood mausoleum, knowing he would find it when the time was right. He carefully removed it, holding it up to the light. It was ornate, with a decorative top shaped like the symbol he had seen on the map and in the stained glass window. The next morning, Thomas called June as soon as it was a reasonable hour. "I found a key," he said without preamble, "hidden in Eleanor's locket. I think it might open the mausoleum." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Thomas," June said carefully, "that would be extraordinary. The mausoleum has been locked for decades, perhaps a century." "I know how it sounds," Thomas said. "But after what we've seen, would it really be the strangest thing?" They agreed to meet at the cemetery at noon. Thomas was too restless to wait until evening, even though that seemed to be when Eleanor appeared. He needed to know what was inside the mausoleum, what secret Eleanor was trying to share with him. When Thomas arrived at Oakwood Cemetery, June was already waiting by the entrance gates. She looked both excited and nervous. "Did you bring the key?" she asked as he approached. Thomas patted his pocket. "Right here. Let's go." They walked quickly through the cemetery, heading directly for the Blackwood mausoleum. It looked different in the bright light of day, less mysterious, more weathered and ancient. Still, Thomas felt a sense of anticipation building within him as they approached. At the mausoleum, Thomas took out the small brass key. It looked impossibly delicate compared to the large rusted padlock securing the door. "Do you really think it will work?" June asked, peering over his shoulder. "Only one way to find out," Thomas replied, inserting the key into the padlock. To his amazement, it slid in perfectly. With a deep breath, he turned the key and the lock opened with a loud click. Thomas and June exchanged an astonished look. "It worked," he whispered, removing the padlock with shaking hands. Together they pushed on the heavy iron door. It resisted at first, years of disuse having sealed it in place, but then slowly gave way with a low, creaking groan. Stale air rushed out as the door swung inward, carrying the scent of dust and time. Thomas switched on his flashlight, shining it into the darkness beyond. The beam revealed a small chamber with stone walls. In the center stood a single stone sarcophagus, elaborately carved with the same symbols they had seen on the map and stained glass window. Around the walls were shelves filled with old books, jars of what looked like dried herbs, and various antique objects. "The Blackwood family crypt," June murmured as they stepped inside, "untouched for all these years." Thomas moved his flashlight around the room, taking in the details. On one wall hung a faded portrait of a woman in Victorian dress, presumably Eleanor Blackwood, the last of her family line. She bore a striking resemblance to his Eleanor, with the same high cheekbones and thoughtful eyes. "Look at this," June said, pointing to an old leather-bound book that lay open on a small stone altar near the sarcophagus. Thomas directed his flashlight beam at the book. It appeared to be a journal, the pages yellowed with age. The handwriting was faded but still legible, written in an elegant flowing script. "October 30th, 1887, Thomas read aloud. "Tomorrow I will join my ancestors as the dream has foretold. I have prepared everything according to tradition. May those who follow find strength in the knowledge I leave behind. The gift passes to the daughters of our line, and with it the burden of foresight. But remember, what seems an ending may sometimes be a warning instead. Death is not always what it appears." Thomas and June looked at each other, processing what they had just read. "The gift of foresight," June said, "just like your Eleanor mentioned in her letter." Thomas nodded, continuing to explore the chamber. On a small table near the wall, he found something that made his heart skip a beat. A modern envelope, stark white against the ancient stonework, with his name written on it in Eleanor's familiar handwriting. With trembling fingers, Thomas picked up the envelope. It was sealed and felt light, as if it contained only a single sheet of paper. "How is this possible?" he whispered. "How could she have placed this here?" June touched his arm gently. "There are more things in heaven and earth, Thomas, than are dreamt of in our philosophy." "Open it." Thomas carefully broke the seal and removed a folded note. As he opened it, something small fell out. A medical business card for a Dr. Philip Chen, neurologist. Thomas picked it up, confused, then read Eleanor's note. "My darling Thomas, if you're reading this, you've followed the path I hoped you would. There is much I couldn't tell you before, but now you must know the truth. My death was not what it seemed. The dream that came to me, the Blackwood warning, was not meant to prepare me for my own passing, but to alert me to a danger I couldn't fully understand at the time. I've discovered something troubling about my condition and treatment. Dr. Chen was trying to warn me, but was silenced before he could. Find him. Show him my medical records. The truth about what happened to me is hidden there. I had to find a way to reach you that they couldn't intercept. This place connected to my ancestors was the only safe way. Be careful who you trust. I will watch over you as best I can. All my love, always and forever, Eleanor. Thomas read the note twice, trying to make sense of it. What is she saying? That her death wasn't natural after all? June read the note over his shoulder, her expression grave. It sounds like she's suggesting someone interfered with her treatment, that her death might not have been from natural causes. Thomas stared at the neurologist's card. Dr. Philip Chen. I never met this doctor. Eleanor's physician was Dr. Reynolds. Perhaps this Dr. Chen was a specialist she consulted without telling you, June suggested, to spare you worry, as she mentioned in her first letter. Thomas pocketed both the note and the business card, his mind reeling with implications. If what she's suggesting is true, if someone deliberately caused her death, then she didn't come back just to say goodbye, June finished quietly. She came back to seek justice. Thomas sat in his car outside the medical office building, gathering his courage. After finding Eleanor's note in the mausoleum 3 days ago, he had done some research on Dr. Philip Chen. The neurologist had left the city hospital where Eleanor had been treated and opened a private practice across town. Thomas had called and made an appointment, giving only his first name and saying he wanted to discuss his late wife's case. June had offered to come with him, but Thomas felt this was something he needed to do alone. Whatever truth lay behind Eleanor's death, he had to face it himself. Taking a deep breath, Thomas got out of his car and entered the building. The elevator carried him to the 4th floor, where a simple sign read, Dr. Philip Chen, Neurology. Inside, the waiting room was quiet and tastefully decorated, with just one other patient reading a magazine in the corner. The receptionist looked up with a professional smile. Good morning. Do you have an appointment? Yes, Thomas Miller. 10 o'clock. After filling out some paperwork, Thomas waited nervously, turning Eleanor's note over and over in his pocket. What exactly had she discovered? And what did she mean by they in her note? Who might have intercepted her attempts to communicate with him? Mr. Miller? A nurse appeared at the door. Dr. Chen will see you now. Thomas followed her to an office at the end of the hall. Dr. Chen rose from behind his desk as Thomas entered, a middle-aged man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Mr. Miller, please have a seat, Dr. Chen said, gesturing to a chair. You mentioned on the phone that you wanted to discuss your late wife's case? Thomas sat down, studying the doctor's face. Yes, my wife, Eleanor Miller. She died 18 months ago of what was reported as a brain aneurysm, but I have reason to believe you might know something about her case that I don't. Dr. Chen's expression remained neutral, but Thomas noticed a slight tensing of his shoulders. I treated many patients at City Hospital before opening my private practice. The name doesn't immediately ring a bell. Do you have any of her medical records with you? Thomas produced a folder containing copies of Eleanor's medical files, which he had obtained from her primary physician. He watched carefully as Dr. Chen reviewed them. After a few minutes, the doctor's expression changed. He looked up, his eyes now wary. How did you know to come to me, Mr. Miller? I'm not listed anywhere in these records. Thomas took out Eleanor's note and the business card, placing them on the desk between them. My wife left these for me to find. She wanted me to talk to you. Dr. Chen picked up his own business card, turning it over in his fingers. His face paled slightly. Left them for you? But how? He trailed off, clearly confused. It's a long story, Thomas said. What matters is that Eleanor believed you tried to warn her about something, and that you were silenced. She thought her death wasn't what it seemed. The doctor was silent for a long moment, staring at the note. Finally, he stood up and went to his office door, closing it firmly and turning the lock. Mr. Miller, he said quietly, returning to his desk, what I'm about to tell you could potentially end my career or worse. But I've been carrying this burden for too long, and if Eleanor found a way to reach out to you... He shook his head in disbelief. She was an extraordinary woman, Thomas leaned forward. Please tell me what happened. Dr. Chen took off his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. I was consulting on your wife's case unofficially. A colleague asked me to look at her scans because something didn't seem right. Eleanor was experiencing headaches and dizzy spells, but her initial tests were inconclusive. I never knew she was having headaches, Thomas said, feeling a pang of guilt. Had he been so caught up in his own life that he missed signs of Eleanor's illness? She told me she didn't want to worry you, Dr. Chen said gently. When I reviewed her case, I noticed some unusual patterns in her symptoms and test results. They were consistent with low-dose poisoning with a certain class of compounds that can damage the brain gradually, eventually causing an aneurysm that looks natural. Thomas felt the blood drain from his face. Poisoning? Are you saying someone was poisoning my wife? Dr. Chen nodded grimly. I believed so. I requested some specialized tests, but they were denied by the department head. When I tried to discuss my concerns with Eleanor privately, I was suddenly reassigned to different cases. Shortly after, I was offered a grant to start my own practice, an offer that came with the implicit understanding that I would drop my inquiries. But why? Thomas asked, his voice hoarse. Who would want to hurt Eleanor? That's what I couldn't figure out, Dr. Chen admitted. Your wife was a librarian and genealogy researcher, not exactly a high-risk profession for making enemies. But when I mentioned my suspicions to her, she didn't seem surprised. She said she'd recently discovered something in her family research that certain people wouldn't want revealed. Thomas thought about the Blackwood connection and Eleanor's research. Did she tell you what she'd discovered? No, she was very careful. Said it was safer if I didn't know the details. Dr. Chen hesitated. The last time I saw her, she said she was preparing an insurance policy in case anything happened to her. She mentioned something about family traditions and leaving messages where they couldn't be intercepted. Thomas's mind was racing. In her research, Eleanor discovered she was related to a family called the Blackwoods. They were prominent in this area in the 1800s. The last one, Eleanor Blackwood, apparently had abilities. She could foresee deaths and was rumored to be able to communicate with the dead. Dr. Chen raised an eyebrow but didn't dismiss the information. I'm a man of science, Mr. Miller, but I've seen enough to know that science doesn't explain everything. If your wife believed she could find a way to communicate after death, through some family connection, he shook his head. What matters now is finding out who might have wanted to silence her. Thomas pulled out his phone and showed Dr. Chen the photos he'd taken of the journal they'd found in the mausoleum. Eleanor was researching these records extensively before she died. The last entry from Eleanor Blackwood mentions that what seems an ending may sometimes be a warning instead. Death is not always what it appears. Almost as if she foresaw similar circumstances in the future, Dr. Chen murmured. But who would benefit from your wife's death? Who might have felt threatened by her research? Thomas thought about it. Eleanor was working on a book about local history, focusing on the founding families of Oakwood. She had mentioned discovering some connections between the Blackwoods and the Harriman family. Dr. Chen looked up sharply. Harriman? As in Harriman Medical Research? Yes, I think so. Why? Because Harriman Medical Research is the parent company that provided the grant for my private practice, the one that came with strings attached about dropping my investigation into your wife's case. Thomas felt a chill run through him. The current head of Harriman is William Harriman. His family has been influential in this city for generations. They own half the real estate downtown and have donated millions to the hospital, which gives them considerable influence over medical decisions and department funding, Dr. Chen added. Thomas remembered something else. Eleanor mentioned she had found records suggesting the Harrimans had acquired their initial wealth under suspicious circumstances, something about taking over Blackwood properties after the last family member died, creating a motive that has lasted generations, Dr. Chen said. If your wife found proof of historical wrongdoing, it might threaten the Harriman family's reputation and legacy, which they've carefully built over a century. Thomas stood up suddenly. I need to see those records again, the ones in the mausoleum. Eleanor must have left more information there. Mr. Miller, Dr. Chen said cautiously, if what we're suggesting is true, these are dangerous people. The Harrimans have connections throughout the city. You should go to the authorities. With what evidence? Thomas asked. A ghost story? A vague suspicion from a doctor who was pressured into silence. We need proof, Dr. Chen nodded reluctantly. You're right, but please be careful and keep me informed. I've lived with the guilt of not doing more to help your wife. I won't make that mistake again. That evening, Thomas met June at the cemetery gates. He had called her earlier and explained everything he had learned from Dr. Chen. I knew Eleanor was trying to tell you something important, June said as they walked toward the Blackwood Mausoleum, but I never imagined it would be something like this. The sun was setting as they reached the mausoleum. Thomas used the brass key to unlock the door and they stepped inside, flashlights ready. Everything was exactly as they had left it days before. We need to look through everything, Thomas said. Books, papers, anything that might contain information about the connection between the Blackwoods and the Harrimans. They spent the next hour carefully examining the contents of the mausoleum. June focused on the old journals while Thomas checked the shelves and containers. Thomas, June called suddenly, look at this. She was holding the original Eleanor Blackwood's journal. There's a hidden compartment in the binding. She showed him how the leather spine of the journal had a small, almost invisible seam. When pressed in a certain way, a narrow drawer slid out from the bottom of the spine. Inside was a folded piece of parchment, sealed with wax bearing the Blackwood family crest. Thomas carefully broke the seal and unfolded the document. It was a deed and contract dated 1887 with the names Blackwood and Harriman clearly visible. This is it, he breathed. Proof that the Harrimans fraudulently acquired Blackwood properties after Eleanor Blackwood's death. They forged her signature on these documents. Look at the date. It's dated 2 weeks after her journal entry saying she would die the next day. June peered at the document. Would this still matter legally after all this time? Maybe not in court, Thomas admitted. But the Harriman family built their reputation on being the city's great benefactors. Their fortune came from these properties. If it became public knowledge that their wealth was founded on fraud and possibly murder, a noise outside made them both freeze. Footsteps were approaching the mausoleum. Thomas quickly photographed the document with his phone, then carefully returned it to its hiding place. He motioned for June to turn off her flashlight. The iron door creaked open and a beam of light swept into the chamber. Thomas squinted against the brightness. Mr. Miller, a man's voice said coldly, finding what you're looking for? As the man stepped into the mausoleum, Thomas recognized him as Richard Harriman, William Harriman's son and the public face of the family's charitable foundation. Mr. Harriman, Thomas acknowledged, trying to keep his voice steady. What brings you here? Let's not play games, Harriman said. We've been monitoring Dr. Chen's office. When you showed up there asking questions about your wife's death, it became clear that she somehow managed to communicate with you. He looked around the mausoleum with distaste. Though I must admit, I never expected this method. The Blackwood legends were just old family stories to us, not something we thought had any truth to them. So you admit it, Thomas said. You had Eleanor poisoned because she discovered the truth about your family's fortune. Harriman sighed. It wasn't personal, Mr. Miller. It was about protecting a legacy. Your wife was going to publish findings that would have destroyed generations of careful reputation building. We offered to buy her research, but she refused. So you killed her, Thomas said, anger rising in his throat. We tried more subtle methods first, Harriman replied calmly, but she was stubborn like her ancestor. He gestured around the mausoleum. History tends to repeat itself, doesn't it? The last Eleanor Blackwood also refused to cooperate with my ancestors. And now what? June asked. You'll kill us too? Harriman smiled thinly. That would be rather obvious, wouldn't it? No, I think he was cut off by a sudden drop in temperature. The air in the mausoleum grew icy, their breath visible in the cold. The flames of the lantern Harriman had brought flickered wildly. What the hell? Harriman muttered, looking around nervously. A wind seemed to sweep through the sealed chamber, though there was no obvious source. Papers fluttered, dust swirled, and the lantern light cast moving shadows across the stone walls. In the dancing light, a figure began to form. Not just Eleanor, but multiple figures, women of different eras all bearing the same distinctive features. The Blackwood women through the generations, standing together in a semicircle around Harriman. The man stumbled backward, his face white with terror. This isn't possible, he gasped. Thomas felt June grip his arm tightly as they watched in awe. Eleanor stepped forward from the group, her form more solid than the others but still translucent. She looked directly at Thomas, her expression filled with love and determination, then turned toward Harriman with unmistakable accusation. Harriman bolted for the door, but it slammed shut before he could reach it. He pounded on it in panic. "You can't escape justice twice," Thomas said quietly. "Not this time." Outside the mausoleum, voices could be heard calling out. Flashlight beams played across the small windows. "Thomas, are you in there?" It was Pete Fletcher, the groundskeeper. "The police are here." Thomas looked at Eleanor questioningly. She nodded and gestured toward the door. "We're in here," Thomas called out. "And we have Richard Harriman with us. He just confessed to having my wife killed." As if on cue, the iron door swung open. Police officers stood outside with Pete, who had apparently called them after seeing Harriman enter the cemetery with a gun. As the police took Harriman away, still babbling about ghosts and impossible visions, Thomas turned back to where the spirits had appeared. The mausoleum was empty now, no trace of Eleanor or the other Blackwood women remaining. But on the floor lay a single object that hadn't been there before: Eleanor's wedding ring, which had been buried with her. Thomas picked it up, feeling its familiar weight in his palm. June touched his shoulder gently. "She can rest now." "They all can." Thomas nodded, slipping the ring onto his little finger for safekeeping. Justice after all these years. For both Eleanors. As they walked out of the mausoleum into the cool night air, Thomas felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced since losing Eleanor. The mystery was solved, justice would be served, and somehow, against all odds, he had been able to say a proper goodbye. He looked up at the stars twinkling overhead and whispered, "Thank you, Ellie, for everything." Somewhere in the gentle breeze that rustled the cemetery trees, he could almost hear her reply, "Until we meet again, my love."